Hello and welcome. My name is William and I have embraced Islam. I'll tell you about how I grew up, how the French society and my own parents taught me to hate Muslims and Islam, how I connected with faith without meeting a single Muslim, how I got married, and then how I found living with Muslims in France, my experiences with Muslims in the UK, and I'll drop a few recommendations for those of you who are new to the faith. I'm not here to convince anyone or to suggest that I'm an example to follow. Far from it. This is about my own journey. And my only hope is that my misadventures could help some people along the way who, like me in the past, are struggling. And if you find something wrong with this video but you cannot suggest any solutions, don't bother commenting because I only reply to constructive comments and questions. Don't subscribe to this channel. This is not a channel about religion or Islam. I do a very different job. This is just my personal journey. The message of Islam is very simple. There is a God, and your purpose on earth is to be good to others, good to the planet, and ask yourself the question if your actions are making this world a better place or not. My parents grew up in Poland. On my mom's side, they were a family of farmers in the district of Świętokrzyskie in south central Poland. On my dad's side, they lived in Piekary Śląskie, which is an industrial town known for its coal mining and iron works. My granddad was a construction worker there. In the 1980s, there was this political movement in Poland called Solidarność. So it was communism at the time, but Solidarność, which means solidarity, enabled some Polish citizens to cross over the Iron Curtain. This is an opportunity my parents seized and decided to go to France. And this is actually in France that they met and got married. And I was born in 1986. They lived first in a council flat in the town of Bagnolet in the banlieue, so this peripheral urban area around Paris. And my mom became a cashier, although she dreamt of studying literature, and my dad was dreaming of working in IT, which he eventually did. When I was 1 year old, my parents were able to secure a mortgage and move out of Bagnolet to a suburban town where they got a house. So you may wonder why my parents didn't give me a French name or a Polish name. They were really scared at the time of the National Front, the far-right party in France. And they were scared that if they come to power, they would send us back all to Poland. And so they wanted me and my sister to assimilate as much as possible. They chose William because they thought it was an international name that people could pronounce easily and the same all around the world. Well, it's not the case at all. You know, I've traveled and know it's not everybody knows how to pronounce William. But I like William, you know, it has a beautiful meaning, and this is maybe one of the reasons why I didn't take an Arabic name, like many would assume, because you know what it means. William means the will. It comes from the root to will. If people really want to give me an Arabic name, I always tell them, well, you can translate it in Arabic. I think it's something like Irada, and yeah, but I'm fine, you know, with William or Will, whatever. So my parents were Christian, Catholics, but weren't practicing that much. Because for many Polish people of their generation, Catholic religion was more of a cultural heritage. This is something you inherit, but it doesn't mean really you believe in anything or not. And actually, currently, most of Poland is agnostic. Polish people identify as Catholics, but it doesn't mean that they will go to church or even believe in the idea of a God. It's just a cultural legacy. My parents didn't like Arabs and black people, and of course, they didn't like Muslims at all, which is ironic because Polish people were heavily discriminated against in France. In sociology, there is a concept called meta-colonialism, you know, how oppressed minorities are able to become oppressors in turn. We were taught at school that France expanded its borders abroad and colonized Africa and other lands to civilize people. And this is the education I had. They completely occluded that the very first university on the planet was founded in Morocco by a woman. Poland itself has a very long story of Islamophobia. In history, it has fought against the Ottomans. Although most Polish people have never met a Muslim in real life, very often they would just, hate Muslims and Islam without any rational explanation. A colleague of mine, Katarzyna Górak-Sosnowska, called platonic Islamophobia. Although you've never met Muslims, you just hate them. Even though there are Muslims settled in Poland since the 14th century. And I've made a whole documentary about it, Muslims in Poland. You can just watch it on YouTube for free. So as a family, there was a period where we would go to church on Sundays, but we stopped when I hit high school because my mom wanted me to focus on my homeworks. She wanted me to be the best at school, get the best grades. I was already familiar with the idea of God, of prayer. I've read the Bible from cover to cover, and I very much like the stories of the prophets and all these adventures. But I didn't like the ritual aspect of the religion, because for me and my sister, it was literally every Sunday standing up for 1 hour, listening to people singing. And the only interesting part of the Mass was when the 5 minutes when the priest would read and comment sections of the Bible. I really like that, but it was only 5 minutes out of 1 hour. So frustrating, right? There was also many things I didn't really understand. The concept of Trinity. Why would Jesus be the Son of God? And this is something specific to Catholicism. Why couldn't you speak directly to God? So this is why you have confession. You would go to the confession, confess your sins to the priest, and because for some reason you needed a middleman. It just didn't compute. If God is everywhere, why would you need a middleman for that? During my school years, I just didn't bother with faith, God, prayer, because I was focusing on my on schoolwork really. Until when I hit university, faith came back in a very unexpected way. Context, it is 2006 and I was studying chemistry at uni, and I've just secured my dream internship. It was a huge lab, and when I mean huge, it was the size of a small town. People cycle from one building to another. It is a government facility which used to do classified works for the military in France. You can Google SNPE in France, and I won't say more. But soon I was realizing that it's not really what I wanted to do. I like to explore things. And in this company, you're very limited with what the government asks you to create, to design. And I realized that if I wanted to explore the why and the how of why molecules produce that kind of color, or these very fundamental questions, I would have needed to wait until I was 60 and with my own lab and research team. And I was like, nah, that's not really what I want to do. At the time, I didn't have a mobile phone with internet. There was no Wi-Fi on the facility. We were in the middle of these hills and fields all around. It was summertime. So one thing I did every evening, I would go out and to the fields. I found a path in the middle of the fields where literally you had no one. For 1 month, what I did is every evening I would sit there and look at the sunset, surrounded by nothing but the song of birds, insects, and the sound of the wind. It was completely quiet. And I was reflecting on the direction I wanted to take in life and realizing, my parents wanted so badly for me to become an engineer, but I was conflicted because I really didn't like the perspective of this future me working for this company until crushing my dreams of exploration and creativity. And I couldn't find any answer. I couldn't find a way out. I was too far gone in my degree and to turn back. And I was getting angry. And I wanted to, somehow release my anger. And at the time, 2006, I had a phone, but it's one of these Nokia brick phone, silver color, and yeah, no internet, the basics of the basic. I just took it in my hand, and to release my anger, I throw it on the path, but not too far because I wanted to find it again. Once I felt a bit better, I just stood up and went looking for my phone, and I couldn't find it for some reason. The grass was not very high, and I really didn't throw it very far away. So I was wondering, where could I have thrown it? I was like moving the grass, looking around, going a bit into the wheat to see if maybe I've thrown it a bit too far, but nothing, literally. The very rational person I am, what I did is I sat down and thought really rationally. So I've used that amount of force in that direction at this angle, so my phone should have landed in a 1 meter circle around that point. Things like that. So I stood up, looked around it, and just couldn't find my phone. And I kept searching and searching and searching until I realized that the sun was setting down. And back then, my phone was the only way for me to communicate with my parents. And I thought, what if my parents call me and I don't pick up the phone? They're gonna think something has happened. They're gonna panic. Completely giving up, I just did what was literally the last thing left to do. I sat down, looked up to the sky, and just said, God, please give me a hand on this. At the very moment I said these words, on that path on which for 30 days not even a dog crossed my way, from the other end I saw a guy driving a scooter on a field. I was actually scared because, I was very young and bad things have happened to me before alone. So, I just sat and thought, I really pray this guy doesn't stop and try to rob me or anything. So I just sat and waited for him to drive by. So he drove by. Nothing happened. But then, when he drove by, the point at which supposedly I threw my phone, because of the weight of the scooter and the spin of the wheel, my phone just bumped out of the grass and I was able to retrieve it. And then, I sat down and I thought to myself, well, I'm a very rational guy. I genuinely believe that what we see as an accident is just a combination of complex laws of physics that happen at a certain time, but it was my interpretation. It was too much for it to be random. It was too much for it to be an accident. It was too much for it to be a coincidence. And with all of my rational brain, I just felt that God somehow has spoken to me. It had to be at the very exact moment I finished these words on this path where no one ever crossed my way, not a single human, not a single animal. A guy on a scooter just drove at the very point where I dropped my phone, which I couldn't find for maybe 1 or 2 hours. How can I explain rationally this? And deep in my heart, but again, if it was someone else, maybe they would have found, a different explanation. But me, I felt in my heart that, yes, God is here. He hears everything. He hears me. And if I ask, He will answer. And this is how I reconnected with faith, with God. But how is that connected to Islam, you would ask me? Well, this is where French Guiana comes into play. We are now in 2007. I just won a massive grant to do my first photo documentary, and I chose to go to French Guiana. For the context, this is a French district, which is technically a French colony in South America. There is a community of people called the Bushinengue. It is a society of Africans who were brought during the time of slavery and fought for their freedom. And since then, 200, 300 years ago, they settled along the main rivers in French Guiana. French Guiana is a French district. If you go there, everything looks like on the continent. You have like your police station, fire station, post office, everything. You pay in euros over there. So everything works just like on the continent. I stayed with some Bushinengue with whom I became friends along the river. We stayed in the villages. Imagine my 21-year-old self coming from France with all the comfort you can imagine, and from one day to another living without tap water, without hot water, electricity. Now these people, although materially they didn't have much, they welcomed me and shared with me as if I was part of the family. And so I was really impressed by their generosity. Bushinengue people are a society who live in harmony with nature. They have very strict rules. For example, when they craft the fish nets for fishing, they make sure the holes, the gaps are not too big and not too small, so the young fishes can still go through, and so they only catch adults. Before they cut trees for building houses or boats, they make a prayer because they believe that the nature is a living being. When you are in French Guiana, on the Amazonian rivers, you feel so small in front of these walls of trees, like from each side of the river. Everything is so huge, and you understand that the human being is literally nothing in front of the creation, literally nothing. And the third thing is I felt a huge feeling of responsibility. When I went there in 2007, white doctors from the continent would refuse visits from black people because I was doing interviews with white teachers teaching Bushinengue people on the river. And they were speaking about black people as if they were animals. They will tell me, why do you bother with them? They're just, they're acting, they're pretending for people to have pity on them and for them to take benefits. They're thieves, they're animals. 2007. And people were talking as if slavery never ended, as if the clocks have stopped 200, 300 years ago. My intention first was to do a documentary about which I would perhaps sell to a magazine or make money from the pictures. But then I thought, what I'm going to do, I'm going to print these pictures and I will organize exhibitions around Paris, in high schools, in universities, and gather students and talk about the things I've seen and the things I've heard, and how in a French district in the 21st century, people still think as if they were like 200 and 300 years ago at the time of slavery. Reflect, please, look and see what people are doing to each other. This is what I wanted to do. And when I was organizing these exhibitions, and I eventually organized one in my parents' town, the person from the council who was helping me setting up the exhibition told me, I was telling him, just like I'm telling you about all these values I've learned being in French Guiana, generosity, humility, living in harmony with nature, and the sense of responsibility when you see injustice. And he told me, well, these are like all values that you find in Islam. And I was, oh, really? And he said, yeah. And I thought, well, Islam sounds like a cool religion, really. It's not that which made me cross the threshold. And how I crossed it was thanks to a proper miracle. You remember the phone story? So this one gets bigger. 2008, in the summer, I was working as a security agent for a private security company. We got this massive building. It was a disused power plant in the north of Paris, 300 meters long, 40 meters high. And because the client didn't have the budget, we were only one agent per 12-hour shift. Back in the days, I was finishing my chemistry degree, so I was doing night shifts, so studying in the day and doing my security shifts at night. I really enjoyed that time of the night between 2 and 3 in the morning where in Paris everything becomes silent. Not a sound, not a car, nothing. Everything becomes quiet. And I really enjoyed these times to meditate and contemplate and reflect on my own existence. You know, I was really conflicted. After all of what I've realized in French Guiana, I wanted to do something more connected with people. I didn't know if I would have to start from scratch sociology and abandon my dreams and my parents' dreams of me becoming an engineer. And I really didn't know what to do with my life. One of these nights was actually a very strange night because, you know, when you are in a big city and you look up on the sky, even if there's no clouds, you barely see any stars. But that night, I remember, was out of the ordinary. You could see quite a few numbers of stars in this. And it was a time where I became used to talk to God as I would talk to a friend. You know, I would confide to him like my worries, my challenges. And I was just casually talking to him out of desperation, I guess, out of, you know, I'm about to give up. I just, again, was talking to God and asked God, you know, I don't know what to do with my life. I don't know what direction to take. Please guide me, give me a sign, like any sign. Tell me what to do. And again, at the very moment I said these words, I looked up to the sky and I saw the longest and the brightest, shiniest shooting star I've ever seen. Just like that. And then I thought, yeah, thanks God. It's a nice surprise, but what am I supposed to do with that? You know, it's just a shooting star. But then, you know me, I'm extremely curious. And back into the office, we had a small computer on location. I opened Google Earth, you know, where you see the whole globe. And I pinpointed my position on the map. And I pinpointed the buildings on the horizon towards which the shooting star was heading. And so, and then I just, I drew the path, and I thought to myself, what if I draw the path further around the globe, and maybe it's going to show me some interesting location. You know, what if it goes to Japan? I would love to explore Japan. So I thought, you know, let's draw the way further. Maybe it's going to show me something really interesting, and which I did. You know, I draw the way, I zoomed out, draw the way further, zoomed out, draw the way further, until I realized the shooting star was pointing at a very specific location on the globe. And I think at that point, you can guess which one it was. It was the path which I drew went just over Mecca. Just, you know, it's like something clicked in my mind, and I thought, okay, God, I stop asking you questions. I get it. I'm gonna do it, and I don't know how, but yeah. And from that very moment, this is where I became convinced in my heart that Islam was the path for me to choose. But again, at that time, I didn't know anything about the rituals, the prayer, and, you know, why do you have to do all these rituals? You know, it felt very foreign to me. But in my heart, something has switched. And I was really determined to do my own research and learn more about Islam.